Hi, Physiology class. Thanks for doing your homework. So there's a lot of different receptors we're going to study in this unit. We have chemoreceptors, which respond to changes in chemical concentrations. Those would be like oxygen receptors, carbon dioxide receptors, hydrogen ion for pH. There's pain receptors. They typically respond to chemicals released during tissue damage. Thermoreceptors respond to changes in temperature. Mechanoreceptors are responding to mechanical forces, like when we touch something. And then our photoreceptors respond to light. And those are only located in our eyes. And actually, I should take that back, also in our pineal gland. So these sensory impulses are traveling on sensory neurons. So just to review what we learned from Unit 1, these sensory neurons have specialized dendrite receptors that are stimulated, which causes local changes in the neuron's membrane potential. Then we create an electrical current in the dendrite end, and if the current is strong enough, we can reach threshold at the axon, and then that axon will trigger an action potential series that travels all the way down the axon, and it would end up with us having a sensation. So a sensation is a feeling that occurs when our brain interprets that sensory impulse. Sensations all look the same en route to the brain. They're just nerve impulses, action potential waves traveling along nerve fibers. So it's not until the brain that we actually interpret what that sensation is. So it all depends on where the impulse ends up in the brain. So if that sensation travels from the body and ends up here, then I'm going to feel it in the trunk. If it's traveling through my body and it ends up in this part of the brain, then I'm going to feel it in my foot. So where the impulse ends up ultimately determines what type of sensation we interpret. Our skin is very sensitive to touch. There's a lot of different mechanoreceptors embedded within our skin, and we're going to look at a few of them. There's sensory receptors. We also are calling those guys free nerve endings, and they specialize in very light touch and pressure. Meissner's corpuscles we find in our hairless skin, like our fingertips, lips, and palms, and they're also for light touch, but maybe a little bit stronger of a mechanical stimulus to get those guys triggered. And then deeper in our skin are our Pacinian corpuscles. And they can even be as far down as our tendons and our muscles, so they're going to sense deep pressure, and they're located deeper within our skin tissues. So in the graphic here, we can see our free nerve endings right there, and they're just below the epidermis. So they're really close to the surface of the skin, really. So they're specializing again in light touch. We have a specialized receptor over here, Meissner's corpuscle, with a special tip or receptive end, and that also does light touch. And then down here deeper, we have our Pacinian corpuscle. So interestingly, this layering you see here, it kind of looks like an onion. So to get these Pacinian corpuscles to be stimulated, we have to push through all of these layers till we finally get down to the tip of the neuron here to get it to fire off. So that ensures that a light touch can't get these guys to fire. So they have this special ending which actually makes sure that only deep pressure stimulates them, not a light touch. So we also have a lot of thermoreceptors for temperature embedded in our skin, and these are free nerve endings, no special tip on them. We have heat receptors, which respond typically between the range of 77 degrees to 113 degrees Fahrenheit. And then our cold receptors, which fire off somewhere between 50 to 68. And then in between that 68 and to 77, maybe they'll both fire. You'll get some hot ones firing, some cold ones firing, so there's some overlap there. When we do go above the 113 or below the 50, then we're also going to trigger pain receptors at the same time. So we'll get hot when it's 115 degrees and pain. So a burning sensation is going to start to develop there. our temperature sensors adapt very quickly, and we're going to talk more about adaptation in a second. But you know when you get into a really hot jacuzzi, and when you get in it's kind of uncomfortable, it's too hot, and then you're just in there for, a minute, 2 minutes, and it already starts to feel like it's cooled. And the water's not cooling down. It's got a thermoregulator on it, so make sure that the temperature stays at 104 degrees in there, but your body doesn't feel like it's as hot because you're adapting to it. So let's talk about adaptation. Adaptation occurs as sensors adapt to a stimulus. So over time, when a stimulus has been constant, those neurons become less responsive to that stimulus. So they'll start to send fewer and fewer action potentials, and eventually they may stop sending an impulse altogether. So once a neuron has adapted, it won't tend to send a new signal again until the stimulus has changed. So it's either gotten stronger, it's gotten weaker, but it's not the same strength of a stimulus anymore. Something is different. And there's an evolutionary reason to do that. Your brain is dealing with hundreds of thousands of sensations it has to interpret and make sense of all of the time. So if the information coming, to the brain isn't any different, then why keep telling the brain that information? We're trying to save it some extra work that it doesn't really need to be doing. So an example of that would be when you put your clothes on in the morning and maybe your sweater feels a little bit too tight on your arms, and after 30 seconds, you don't really feel it anymore. Your brain has gotten the information. It's not any different. It's not dangerous that sweater is tight, so there's really no reason for the brain to keep hearing, the sweater's too tight on your arm, the sweater's too tight on your arm, the sweater's too tight on your arm. So we just turn it off, basically. We have some other mechanoreceptors embedded in our tissues. They're called proprioceptors. And these sensors are typically located in our muscles and tendons and inside of a joint, and they respond to mechanical movements. And this is how we know when our parts move. Projection is sort of this weird phenomenon that makes us feel like our fingers are doing the touching and our nose is doing the smelling and our ears are doing the hearing, when we know really the brain is doing all of that. So our brain somehow projects the sensation back to the source of the stimulus to make us feel like our fingers are doing the touching. It's kind of a weird phenomenon. We don't understand it completely, but that's what's happening.